This next session we're very excited about. Changes in tact of where we're going a little bit. And I think you're really going to enjoy our next speaker. He's very, very interesting. He's an author, a traveler, and an overall thought leader. He's written many, many books. First being Liar's Poker, which many of you have, which is a very data-centric book about the trading desk at Salomon Brothers in the 80s. Blindside, which made you a movie. The New Thing, Boomerang, which is very interesting because it talks about the crisis going around the globe and the financial crisis, among many others. He's also written a book that has become very relevant, particularly today. And the book he wrote before was called Moneyball. Moneyball, which was driven by data many, many years ago in the Oakland Athletics. We'll talk a lot about that, but it's very relevant because yesterday, Oakland Athletics clinched the division by taking out the Texas Rangers. He's very, very interesting to hear his insights in that. He's also been very, very active in his community and working with his daughter's softball teams, which I think is probably the most exciting thing he does. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Michael Lewis. What made you move from such a data-driven technical book to such a fun and interesting environment like Moneyball?
I moved with my wife out here to Berkeley. The Oakland A's were in our backyard, and I started to get interested kind of in the late 90s in the money aspect of sports. I hadn't written a word about sports, but the first thing that interested me was when these baseball players became free agents. When free agency hit sports, and all of a sudden you were getting multi-million-dollar contracts. And I remember turning on the TV and seeing that the left fielder on the Oakland A's was being paid $20 million, and the right fielder was being paid $150 grand. And I wanted to write a story about how pissed off the right fielder was when the left fielder dropped a fly ball. That was the first. And I called up the magazine editor. I said, "Let me go out there and just wander around the clubhouse and see how much class resentment there is within a baseball team." And it never happened. But the more I kind of watched it, the more curious it became, because it wasn't just intra-player that was interesting, it was the intra-team. And baseball has a problem, or a predicament. It's very similar to European soccer, completely different from American football and American basketball. And it is that the teams, there's no revenue, not a lot of revenue, but redistribution. So you have rich teams and poor teams, teams with massive sums of money to spend on players, and teams with not so much money to spend on players. And when I got interested, the A's had, like as they do today, the second to the lowest payroll in baseball. At the time, it was maybe $30 million. And the Yankees were like 150 or 130 million bucks. And the A's were winning as many games as the Yankees. And I'd come out of the financial markets, and it seemed to me that if the market for baseball players was anything like efficient, the teams with the most money would just buy up all the best players and win all the time. And the poor teams shouldn't be able to. And the record that the Oakland front office had accumulated was astonishing in relation to its payroll. So I just went very innocently. It wasn't just to write a little magazine piece. I went to the A's spring training complex. They were in spring training at the time, and met the general manager, Billy Beane, now played by Brad Pitt, and just to see what was going on. And this was 2000. This was 10 years ago. And the question I put to him was just, how can you compete with a team that's got 3 or 4 times the sums of money to spend on players? Why doesn't the rich team win all the time? And he said to me, "No one has asked me that question." And I thought that was amazing. It seemed like such an obvious question, but the sporting world doesn't pay that much attention to the financial side of things. And he said, and he started to tell a story. And the story was, this market is radically inefficient. That that baseball players are not properly valued, and we are using data. We're finding new data. We're questioning old metrics, trying to find better ways to measure the value of a baseball player so we can spend our money more efficiently. He said we're essentially value investors in this marketplace with baseball players. And I thought that was riveting. I never heard that before. But I didn't know what I was going to do with it. So I spent several months basically just marinating in the organization, following him around, sitting in his office, listening to conversations. And at some point it occurred to me, it's a kind of science experiment. They have these hypotheses about baseball players, and then they go act on those hypotheses about baseball players. And I asked him, I said, do the players know that they're these kind of lab rats in the science experiment? And he said, no, we don't tell them anything because it just confuses them. And so now I thought, this is great. I can go tell the players that they're lab, and they'll have a way, it was a way to start a conversation with a player. That, you go up and you say, do you have any idea why they moved you from shortstop to second base? Or why you're hitting 7th in the lineup? Or why you're playing Major League Baseball at all? Why this is the only team that wants to employ you? And so I was, without really thinking about it, what I was doing was a kind of casting search for characters in the book. But I went to go get to know all the players and try to have this conversation about how the science of baseball was affecting their life. And where the book, I can remember where this becomes a book. And it was after a game, I was waiting for a player to come out of the showers. I was sitting in his locker just waiting for him to dry it off and dressed. And for the first time, I was watching the A's come out of the showers. And it was the first time I'd seen the Oakland A's naked. And it was such an appalling sight. It was such an unattractive sight. There was fat everywhere. There was no muscle definition. And I remember thinking that, if you line those naked bodies up against the wall and asked anyone what they did for a living, no one would guess they were professional athletes. They looked all wrong. And I mean, they might guess they were in the technology industry. But they would never guess these were athletes. And I casually then, I was in the front office one day and I mentioned this to Billy Bean's number 2, a fellow named Paul DePodesta. I said, Paul, I saw your guys naked and it was really not a pleasant sight. A baseball uniform hides so much that you can really bury a lot under that thing and people don't know what's there. And I said, they kind of just don't look right. And he said, that's the point in a way. He said, we can't afford players who look right. Because players who look right, the market values properly. They can see their value when they look like stud baseball players. We're in the market for essentially defective people. People who've got something grotesquely wrong with them. That blinds the marketplace to their value as baseball players. They look wrong, but they can play. And he said, and then he went off on this tangent that he said, so for example, he said they had a relief pitcher at the time named Jim Messier, who had 2 club feet. And he went on to say how great those club feet were, because it scared everybody off from hiring this guy, but the club feet actually enabled this pitcher to impart this fantastic spin on his screwball. And so it was a putative defect. It was actually an asset. And it was at that moment I just thought, well, this is really interesting. They were this juggernaut. They were winning as many games as any, for the previous 5 years, they won as many games as any team in baseball. They were consciously building the team out of defective parts, using better analysis about what is a baseball player, where is value in a baseball player, and nobody's seen it. And at that point I backed away from it. I thought, this isn't actually about sports. It's not about baseball. Stop thinking about it. Think about this as a business. And the baseball players are just the employees of the business. They've been doing basically the same job for 100 years. The game hasn't really evolved a whole lot. They have statistics attached to every move they make on the job. And millions of people who think they know what a good baseball player is watch them intently while they do their job. If this employee can be so misvalued that you can run around the earth collecting misvalued ones and build one of the best teams in baseball, who can't be misvalued? And at that point I realized I had a story that was really about the way markets value or misvalue or fail to value people properly. And beneath that was a story about the value of data, and the value of finding proper metrics rather than spurious metrics for valuing them. And for identifying the value in identifying the biases that infect the human mind when they're making intuitive judgments about the values of things. They prefer the one that looks good to the one that looks defective. But the one that looks defective may actually be better at the job. So this was that's what launched the book in the first place.
Well, you know, baseball is very statistically driven, and people watch the numbers, as you said, all the time. I am unfortunately from Boston, and
well, it was going well for a while.
It was going well for now.
And you've got to admit that being from Boston and a fan of the Red Sox, you live to suffer. Right. And so it was disturbing to you.
That's why I'm in technology.
You were winning World Series, and so you had nothing to blame your unhappiness on anymore. And now you can have it back. Now you've got the Red Sox, they're back where they were before, and you have an answer to your own unhappiness.